I'm Kyle Carlin, and this is my case study for EDL 850 School Law. For the first part of problem identification, what do I know so far? We know that this is happening to staff and a principal at a high school. We know that the principal is highly regarded and experienced. We know that the teacher is in their early career and holds students to high expectations. It's a relatively affluent community. Students have high aspirations, and so those high expectations are sometimes met with negative emotions because of the challenges that it presents for their future. And then the principal has given advice to Miss Walker, but she has not used it yet. We also know that Miss Walker received an email following a long weekend that linked to a website. The website had negative opinions about her performance and included a statement asking if she should disappear. She contacted the principal immediately and shared her concerns. The principal reviewed the information and then expressed his opinion that it was a prank. Miss Walker named a potential student who could be responsible, and the principal and Miss Walker came up with a plan to address it on Monday. What do we need to know? First of all, what are some of the specific policies around potential threats? The way that the statement was made, it wasn't a direct threat saying that she was going to be injured in any way or whatever. It was just a threat to, or a statement to have her disappear. That could be taken in a number of different ways. But what specifically are some of those policies that relate to that? Are there other students who may be involved, and do we even know for sure that the student that she identified is involved? Is there evidence that any of the comments on the website were made during school hours? Because if the comments were made outside of school hours, not necessarily if it was a threat, but if for the other comments, the school may not have any standing in acting towards the students. And then, are there other people who need to be contacted? Again, depending on the seriousness of the threat, police might need to be contacted. Other district personnel might need to be, if there's a crisis intervention team or anything like that. Depending on the level of the threat perceived through the investigation, other people may need to know. But ultimately, the problem is that Miss Walker feels threatened by the post on the website, and a resolution is needed that addresses her safety while respecting the rights of everyone involved. Okay, so my proposed plan is, as the principal, I would review the email and the website again, looking for any more information that maybe I missed at first glance. And then I would meet with the students individually, the suspected student and any of his friends or anybody else that might be involved. Meet with them individually without Miss Walker present. That way, Miss Walker would, feeling threatened, she may bring more emotion to the conversation than is needed at the moment. And so, talking with the students individually, I think it would help be able to get to the root of what was going on and determine if more action is needed. If the students did not provide clarity on the website or a comment, then action by the school will be difficult because it's really hard. If we don't know who did it, we can't punish somebody just because we think they did it. We have to have some evidence, that, especially in regards to something that happened outside of school hours. If after time has passed, Miss Walker still feels threatened, then the information could be turned over to police for them to investigate if it rises to the level of a threat against a person or any other action that needs to be taken. If students do provide more clarity about the nature of the website and the final comment, then parents would be contacted and further action would be taken. If the threat is substantiated, then police would be contacted to address it as a threat. If it is found to be just a prank, then the students involved would be subject to appropriate consequences, depending on their involvement and the nature of when it happened, how it happened, and the like. Some form of communication would need to happen between the parents, students, and Miss Walker. And Miss Walker would need to have her fears addressed to allow the issue to be resolved completely. And then separate from the website and comment issue, as principal, I would continue to provide guidance and feedback about the application of strategies I shared to address student stress with Ms. Walker. She is implementing things that were recommended, and while it's not her fault for the threats or anything, there is still a need there that's not being addressed by the teacher that, as a principal, has already been brought up and needs to continue to be addressed. Implementation of my plan, I would conduct motivational interviewing with students to gauge their intent, motivation, and involvement. I'd engage in active listening with Ms. Walker and parents to validate any concerns. I'd follow crisis plans for threats if a threat was substantiated, and I'd use reflective leadership to consider all potential actions and the laws that apply. Okay. As far as what is best for students, first of all, we have to think about the safety of all students and to maintain a climate conducive to learning. So the situation needs to be resolved. We have to make sure that Ms. Walker feels safe. We have to make sure that students feel safe, and that any attitudes or negative emotions have at least been worked through to a point where the student and teacher can work together in the learning environment. And this can only be done if a lot of this can only be done if the students in question can be identified. Even if identified, the action taken must be mindful of the student's rights to due process and freedom of expression, as well as libel and slander of naming students without being sure. We want to be very careful. The allegations of threats, if we put that on a student in error, it can create a liability for the district and for Ms. Walker or whoever's putting that out there. Some of the data from the case, ultimately it's really pretty vague, and there's a lot of assumptions that have to be made about the actions, the intent, who was involved, those kind of things. The only comment from the thread that we as the audience know is more of a question. Should she disappear? And is not a direct threat saying how that would happen or anything like that. The student in question is based only on a hypothesis, so the principal and teacher should proceed with caution to make sure that we don't slander a student who really hasn't been involved or isn't guilty in this. We don't even know for sure that it is a student, just know that they know about the school, but is it really a student or not? And then the teacher will still need to make the appropriate adjustments to her learning environment. Okay. Ultimately, while I was working through this case study, I was thinking about this. That the situation is concerning, but doesn't feel threatening. Again, as I've mentioned before, that it's more of a question more than a direct threat towards Miss Walker, and I certainly understand her concern about it, but I feel like there needs to be a lot more information gathered before we can take any action. Ultimately, safety needs to be maintained. At this point, it doesn't seem like there's a legitimate, an immediate risk to anybody, but making sure that the emotional and physical safety of all people involved are maintained. And I was also thinking, don't jump to conclusions. There's a lot of students that it could be, so jumping straight to an individual student, even the questioning by the principal of, can you think of anybody that did that? It may have been leading for the teacher who then kind of jumped to a name and then kind of got stuck on that name, instead of, we want to make sure that we're not doing some confirmation bias to figure out who did this. Some of my feelings, I'm definitely concerned about the safety and well-being of others. I'm concerned about the rights of all people involved, especially those that that haven't done anything wrong. And then I'm also still have some disappointment that the teacher hasn't implemented some of the strategies that I've recommended as the principal. I'm valuing the high standards of the teacher. It's great that she has high standards for her students, but she also has to, and high expectations for her students, but she still has to balance those high expectations with the amount of stress that they're feeling. I'm valuing the safety of others, and I'm valuing the rights of the students that are involved. As far as unresolved issues, the student still isn't identified. That changes that's a huge piece in this puzzle of trying to figure out what I as a principal and what we as a district can do to address the situation. the teacher has not made changes that have been asked of her, that needs to be resolved so that all students feel comfortable in that learning environment. What policies are in place? There's, again, a lot of assumptions. If in this case there probably is a policy, or there should be a policy in place with the crisis plan or something of how to deal with threats or potential threats. And if it's not considered a threat, one thing is, would the district have any standing to hand out consequences? Because if the comments happened outside of school property, not using school devices, and outside of school time, then there's freedom of speech issues that might supersede that. Okay, so reflecting on Standard 5, I considered the rights of everyone involved. When looking at integrity and ethical behavior, I considered the rights of everyone involved. I considered the safety of everyone, and I developed a plan to act timely, but not so quickly that inappropriate actions are taken against an innocent person. As far as dignity and respect, I validated concerns of the teacher, I respected the rights of the accused, and I interviewed students individually so as not to embarrass them or put them in a situation where they might feel intimidated by the teacher. Very similar to how you might deal with bullying, where you only talk to one student at a time to prevent any power differential from changing what people are talking about or are sharing. And then personal code of ethics, I would consider the decision, or I considered the decisions I made in the past that helped me be successful. In this scenario, as a 9-year principal and highly regarded, I've gotten there through the decisions I've made in the past. So I'd want to consider, have I dealt with anything like this before? And if I did, what did I do then? Because it was likely successful. I considered what is the right thing to do and acted consistently upon that. And then I considered how the action would affect all stakeholders that are involved, making sure that everybody's thoughts and concerns were addressed appropriately and were validated, so everybody felt like they were heard, and making sure that it prevents any resentment from carrying over, or any other negative emotions from carrying over. Okay. All right. But ultimately, I found this to be a very interesting case study of how you deal with a situation like this. There's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of questions of even if the school has anything to do in that. It depends on who is involved, when they were involved, what all those circumstances are. But ultimately, I found it very interesting and a very good thought experiment trying to figure out how would I deal with this if I was the principal in that school. So thank you for listening. Have a great day.